From the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, this is Potomac Watch.
Welcome back. I'm Paul Gigot here with Alicia Finley and Kim Strassel, and we're talking about the immigration war between the states. And let's talk about this from the point of view of some of these so-called sanctuary cities, self-described sanctuary cities, which are now receiving migrants that they didn't bargain for, courtesy of Greg Abbott, now Ron DeSantis, governors of Texas and Florida. And Governor of Illinois, J.B. Pritzker, has declared a state of emergency here after 500 migrants have descended on the city, and he feels unable to cope. Washington, D.C. has received several thousand, maybe as many as 11,000. The mayor there also saying it's an emergency. Mayor Adams of New York City receiving upwards of 10,000 or so, also saying our social system simply can't cope with it. Now, I think, Alicia, Abbott sending these buses is no doubt a political stunt. He's trying to get attention for the fact that the border is not controlled and the burdens that they have to deal with. But he's also trying to make a political point here, and a politically important point, which is, hey, welcome to my world. Now you know what it's like to have to cope with these migrants who are coming in from all over. And, maybe you can put some pressure on your party, Democrats, and on President Biden to help us do something about it.
Right. I tend to view immigrants as an asset to the country. The problem here is that most of these who are coming are applying for asylum. They come to the border and they may not actually be fleeing persecution in the way most people think of it, as in religious persecution or ethnic persecution, but are fleeing gang violence or economic troubles back home. And they apply for asylum and are essentially waived in under rules that the Biden administration has put in place. And the Obama administration also had those in place. And the Trump administration tried to roll them back some, but they're very easy to game. And so then they apply for asylum, they're waived, and they can't work for 6 months. After 6 months, they can get a work authorization. So for essentially 6 months, they're dependent on the government. And I think this is government or charities especially. And that's why the trouble that Texas, Arizona, California hasn't complained so much about it, but these states are having is that their charities are overwhelming, their social safety nets are being overwhelmed, and the federal government isn't providing much support. It's not that these workers will eventually probably be able to contribute to society and economically, and they probably came to the country to do so. But for the next 6 months or so, they are unable to. And therefore, they need the support of the government. I'm a little bewildered that this is as big of a problem, or they're complaining, howling so much about this, is to your point, because they do call themselves sanctuary cities or sanctuary states, in that they do not cooperate with the ICE in terms of law enforcement, and do not, when they actually have illegal immigrants in their jails for one reason or another, maybe it's a drunk driving violation, maybe it's theft, they do not inform ICE about this. So I do appreciate the Republican governors underlining the hypocrisy of these Democrats who claim to have a compassionate immigration policy and being open and welcoming to immigrants, and now complaining that, they're too much of a burden on them.
And Ron DeSantis, who's politically canny as they come, also running for re-election, as is Governor Abbott this year, he sent a couple of plane loads of migrants who had come from Texas into Florida. He sent them on to Martha's Vineyard off the coast of Massachusetts, another state that claims to be very hostile to ICE and the welcoming of immigrants. And they've landed on this famous vacation isle, home to Barack Obama on his vacations, home to the rich and famous. Lovely place. I've been there a couple of times myself
I've never been, Paul. I'll have to take your word for it.
I mean, I'm not a regular. In my younger days, I rented a house there a couple of times, and, for a week in the summer, and the beaches are fabulous. And I'm sure that the migrants will get jobs because there's a shortage of workers in these resort areas across the country, as you all know. DeSantis is also pulling a stunt here, and he's going to get a lot of attention for it. And I guess the question is, Kim, how does this play politically in the Florida and Texas and then in these other states?
Well, it plays very well. And as you said, he's very canny, because let's dissect why he did that particular move. The argument, the message that is going to be sent to many voters is that you have a lot of Democratic politicians who are living in these beautiful ivory tower outposts where they don't have to deal with the messy reality on the ground that people are dealing with in Texas and in Arizona, not just in terms of the flood of all the people coming through, but associated crime. There's been drugs coming across the border. That's a different issue, but there's a lot of follow-on effects from this as well. So DeSantis is essentially saying, hey, why don't you get a taste of our world for a while? And that will strike a lot of voters as deserved, and they'll appreciate it. It's interesting to me, I just as a side note, hearing a lot of Democratic politicians call this a stunt. But then more recently, they've been moving to declare these emergencies because what has gone from a small issue for some of them is growing into a bigger problem. And so they're now actually going from trying to win the war of words over this to understanding the economic and logistical realities of this. I think that the emergency declarations are stunts themselves a bit in that most of them are aimed at maybe trying to jiggle a little bit more money out of federal coffers to deal with this. But at some point, I think Democrats are going to have to maybe begin, even if it's behind the scenes, exerting some pressure on the administration to do something. And that was the purpose of all this in the beginning.
On that point about the administration doing something, let's listen to Kamala Harris again, the vice president, talk about her idea of what immigration reform would involve.
We also have to put in place a law and a plan for a pathway for citizenship for the millions of people who are here and are prepared to do what is legally required to gain citizenship. We don't have that in place because people are playing politics. In a state like this and in Congress.
Well, she's right. There's a whole heck of a lot of politics going on here, but it's not one-sided. Alicia, this point about a path to citizenship, as a matter of policy, I'm certainly not against it. But I think just the political reality is you're just not going to be able to pass any kind of immigration reform with that and get any Republican votes now, particularly with the border, the mess that it is. And insisting on that path to citizenship as the goal of any immigration reform guarantees it's not going to happen. And so what we have is this status quo where the migrants keep coming. And when they're not talking about just from Mexico and Central America, I mean, they're Venezuelans and Cubans and Ukrainians are coming over the border because everybody knows it's essentially open. So you can come through, take your chances on asylum. We have to fix the asylum laws so that people who want asylum really are those who need it and not merely economic migrants. And then the other side, let's have some immigration reform that allows more legal pathways for immigration so people can come and work here legally. And then if they want to return home after that, fine. You let them find a way to help feed their families and provide for their families. And they want to go back, as many do, home where they feel more culturally part of the community. They can do that. They have family and so on. We're just stymied on any of that because the administration doesn't seem to, Biden has had shown no interest in any of this. And on the other side, a lot of Republicans just don't want to vote for anything that would allow more legal immigration.
I think that's right. I mean, this has been an issue going back decades. Recall the Gang of Eight in 2013, the senators, there was a bipartisan proposal, which was sensible and provide more border security in return for legal status for some of these and increased visas for, as you mentioned, ag workers and such. And it really hit a brick wall. And you saw that happen again and again in the Trump administration, where proposals were floated to legalize or provide some kind of pathway to citizenship for the dreamers, the young people who were brought into the country legally when they were kids, in return for beefed up border security. And members of both parties would seek to throw in some kind of poison pills that would be unacceptable to the other members or to the other party. And I think that's where we are right now. We're still at a standstill. My hope is that, to be honest, that the Fifth Circuit right now is considering the legality of President Obama's DACA that provided legal status for these dreamers. And if it does strike a program down, which I suspect it will go up to the Supreme Court, be appealed, but that will actually put some more impetus behind the immigration reform, try to force both parties to come together. Granted, it'll probably be an election year, 2024.
Oh, that'll be easy.
Yeah. And maybe they'll use it to beat each other up. I think there also will be a lot of pressure on the Democratic side to get some kind of compromise, to provide some kind of a certainty in legal status for these young people who held out the hope that they would have a legal status. And now it's being yanked away from them. And maybe they just be cynical. They'll probably beat up the Supreme Court and blame the Supreme Court for it. But there is a humanitarian issue that they will have to address.
That's the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals hearing that case, and then it would undoubtedly be appealed to the Supreme Court. We don't know how the Supreme Court would rule. On the DACA point, these are the young people, the dreamers so-called, who were brought to America by their parents or other relatives when they were minors and now find themselves in legal limbo. And President Obama had legalized them in executive order back in his second term. And it's been legally contested ever since. So that could be a motivating moment for some kind of political action. I think we're going to have to leave it there for today. I want to thank Alicia. Thank you, Kim. And thank you all for listening. Be sure to send us your comments and questions at pwpodcast@wsj.com. And if you like the show, please do hit that subscribe button. Wall Street Journal subscribers can also join Kim and Karl Rove and yours truly for a live opinion event. Can Republicans retake Congress on Monday, October 17th at 7 p.m.? That will be live in Dallas or streamed online. And for more information, go to wsjplus.com/opinion live for tickets and more information. And as always, we will be back here tomorrow for another edition of Potomac Watch.